shock waves of violence seem to go on and on. And though these acts of violence are senseless, they are not random. They have a purpose. And the result of that, for many of us, is just to create a generally anxious and fearful feeling. We feel helpless before such firepower, or giant trucks just mowing down people in the street. We really aren't in a position to physically stop these things from happening. And so we sit with our feelings of powerlessness and anxiety. I don't mean to say that the scriptures tell us that this isn't real, or that there is an easy answer, or that you just stop feeling that way. They don't, as far as I can tell. But they do offer a perspective which I'd like to share and see if it gives us a little bit of breathing space in the midst of this craziness. Because this is what I heard in the text from Colossians today, which I found really powerful and beautiful. I know it's Paul, and I know it's therefore sometimes seems abstract and fussy. But Paul is here quoting actually a hymn, and it would be interesting to see how it would be written if they were able to pull it out and do it properly. But these opening lines in Colossians are actually a quote. And he says that Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Do you notice how many times the word all is used? Paul is saying something which was not readily apparent to the people of his day either, where he also lived in a society of great violence and regular public crucifixions, for goodness sake, and random governmental intrusions in people's lives. I mean, it was a very scary time. But Paul quotes this to remind us that there is more. That at the foundation, Christ is in all. That all of creation, that every human being was created by the will and purpose of Christ. Things visible and invisible. You know, in Paul's mind, that had to do with invisible, angelic, and other kinds of beings and powers. But we also know that there is so much invisible. The vastness of the universe is invisible to us. The tininess of the universe is invisible to us. And Paul is saying that all of that is not only visible to God, but God is somehow in that in Christ. That somehow Christ is like the glue that holds it all together. Christ is the heartbeat and the rhythm that makes the rivers flow and the trees grow. Christ is what causes my liver and my brain and my kidneys and my bones to not just be a pile of chaotic mess on the ground. That somehow Christ is in all. We are not alone. We are radically not alone. And God has purpose for all of this. And the purpose, if we step way back, isn't too hard to see. intention for all of us. And yet, bizarrely, we human beings have the freedom to choose otherwise. We have the freedom to live otherwise. And we have the freedom to harm one another and to mess up our society and to do all kinds of things. Isn't that interesting? But God didn't leave us alone because of that. God gave us that freedom. We choose to do what we do. Perhaps it's a process of learning. But into that comes Christ in the person of Jesus. So even our crazy human existence is not without Christ's presence. In the historical person of Jesus, who goes to the cross and endures a gruesome, tortured, violent death. In order to what? To reconcile. So the word all is repeated, I think 7 times in this passage, or more. And the word reconciliation are both key. God's intention is for the whole world to function in wholeness, and for all of humanity to function as one, as the body of Christ, living out Christ's intention and purpose with our hands and our feet and our mouths and our minds and our wills. That under Christ as the head, we discover who we really are and live that out in the world. And that is the work of reconciliation. And it is a long, historic, big picture kind of process. Now, it's not a program. It's not like we have all the answers right before us for how to fix our broken world. But when we stand in this deep affirmation that the world is God's and made out of God's goodness, and that human beings have a place in that, and that our place as the body of Christ is to cooperate with God's reconciling purposes, then we can see how we have work to do. We may not be able to fix this problem or that problem, but we can engage the large problem of reconciliation. Every single one of us has multiple roles to play and gifts to give in the work of reconciliation in this world. The violence of our culture is deep and broad, and these acts of terror are the tips of the iceberg in some ways. And when we see them, we're tempted to be paralyzed and distracted. But we must not be paralyzed and distracted. The gospel invites us to awaken to all the ways that we can positively participate in the work of reconciliation. And in a way, it doesn't matter where you attack it. It doesn't matter which place you plug in, because it's all connected. Remember that all word. It's all connected. We're all of a piece. This whole planet is a piece in God. So if we work for reconciliation in our own families, or we work for reconciliation in our own town, or if we commit ourselves to working for economic justice or racial equality, or if we work to revise harsh and destructive laws, or to rework a penal code that's not working, or to address cycles of addiction, or to work for sensible gun laws, pick something. Just pick something. It doesn't matter, in a sense. It's all God's work of reconciliation, and it all impacts, and it all connects. And these small gestures become a part of an intention, of God's own intention. And these actions flow with God's creative work, which is alive and at work in human beings at a cellular level, already there. And we can manifest it beyond that in our that's the place where it really needs to be harmonized, right? That's the place where we really need to awaken to God's Word. The unconscious stuff seems to take care of itself. My heart is beating and doing just fine without me thinking about it. But I had to think about what I said today. And I thought long and hard, and I struggled with it, because this is a hard sermon. I hope it's making some sense. But that's our struggle. To be about the work of reconciliation, whatever that means to you. For me, it means trying to come up with a difficult sermon. For you, what does it mean? What does it mean in your place, in your life, in your time? How will you live out God's work in you? One of the places that I think we are being, as a whole community, invited to really look at the work of reconciliation is around issues of race. The shootings of those police were tragic and hideous and a horrible distraction, in my opinion, from the very legitimate concerns that were being raised in the peaceful protest that day. That our nation needs to be about the work of dealing with systemic racism as it is manifest in our laws and in our practices of law enforcement and our penal system. To me, reconciliation means listening to the experience of others, to listening to the experience particularly of people of color who feel disenfranchised and experience the brunt of this legal system. And it is incumbent, in the whole work of reconciliation, it is always incumbent upon those who experience comfort and privilege. Not to get paralyzed by guilt, but to step back for a moment and listen carefully to those who do not experience comfort and privilege and hear those perspectives. For me, when I think about reconciliation, that is step one. When something's going wrong in a relationship, we have to listen to one another. That's where we start. We start by listening carefully to one another. And it is especially important, I think, in Christian theology for those who experience I'm going to say a power advantage. We don't think of ourselves as powerful. But in relationships with one another, we have particular power. Certainly, for instance, in a relationship between parent and child, there is a great deal of power in the parent's hands. We may feel powerless when that child is crying, but we have the power to pick that child up and throw it against the wall. And people do that sometimes, right? So a parent is huge moral imperative on the parent to be extremely careful with power so that we use the power to benefit the relationship and try to understand. And that's why we have child labor laws, and that's why we have all kinds of things to protect people who are outside of the power system or have an equal relationship to power. Once we kind of get that in our guts, I think it helps us begin to understand that when people experience themselves as being disempowered, those who have power need to stop and listen. Stop and listen. And not take for granted that everybody has the same life, that everybody has the same benefits, that everybody has the same access to freedom and to thrive. So however you go about this work of reconciliation in your personal relationships, in your relationships in the community, in your relationships in the larger world, and I invite those of us who are white to especially think about how we go about the work of reconciliation understand that. And once we begin to understand that, we can start to take action to change some of the inequalities and address some of the pain. And be about the work of reconciliation, taking responsibility for our own behavior and actions. And behavior and actions of our common culture. Now, that's an example. Yes, the last thing I want to say when I think about Martha and Mary, and my first impulse was to say nothing about Martha and Mary today. It's a sweet story, but it gets kind of, it becomes trite after a while. But it's a deep story too. You see in Martha that kind of busy, anxious quality of something's got to get done, and I've got to do something, I got to fix it, and I got to make it all better. And you see in Mary that willingness to be deeply present to Christ and to take in that message, the word, the love of Christ fully. She's opened herself fully to that, and she's given it her complete attention. And it is not that Jesus is saying we don't need to do things. He's not saying that. He's saying that at this particular moment, she's doing what is necessary. She is doing the one thing necessary for transformation, so that all the other actions have meaning and purpose. The one thing necessary for transformation is to acknowledge the goodness, presence, and call of God in our lives to the work of reconciliation. To be fed by that, to be nurtured by that, to be strengthened in that identity. That is the one thing necessary to which we are all called. From there, then, it will make sense, whatever our Martha work is. To be an artist, to be an activist, to be a parent. We'll understand that role and we'll live that role with authority in the name of Christ. The body of Christ, being the church, we're not here to be entertained. We're not even here to get a good feeling and be encouraged a little bit. That's nice. I know that's a good thing. Both of those things are good. I don't want you to be bored. But the purpose of the church is to be the body of Christ at work for reconciliation in the world. And we come here to soak up that reality and to align ourselves with that reality. And so I invite you to do so as we continue in worship today. And thanks for your patience with my ramblings.